Hey everybody, Shilly with the Go Box and Vine Go, getting all dialed in. We're going to paint Oregon Oasis today. Here we go. We're going to be using 3 brushes today. We're going to be using something that's a little bit on the big side, either a 1-inch wash like I've got, or maybe we'll be using a number 16 half-inch wide brush thereabouts. The wash brush is a good one. If you've got the kit, brush kit from us, you should have this brush. Then also we're going to be using a number 8 brush, and you can either use a flat or a round, either one works. And then we're going to also use kind of this little guy once in a while, maybe towards the end, just to do a little bit of fine detail. And let me tell you a little bit about this painting. This is Oregon Oasis, and it's inspired by a painting that I found by one of my favorite artists. His name's Frederick Church, and I think I'll throw that painting up on the screen right about now. Now, this particular painting is a jungle theme. I believe it's from the Bayou. And I decided I really like that painting, but let's make it a Pacific Northwest painting. So we came up with Oregon Oasis. So let's go ahead and dive in here. I'm going to take my biggest brush first. And whenever we start painting, I always like to give it a quick little rinse. Make sure it's nice and fresh and pliable. And then kind of pat it dry on my paper towel. I don't want it to be dripping wet. A little bit of moisture is good, but dripping wet, not a good idea. All right, so whenever we paint a landscape, we want to start the furthest distance back, which in this case is the sky. And typically that's always going to be the case. So I'm going to start off using a little bit. Let's talk about the colors before we get going too far. We do have phthalo blue, black, white, raw sienna, phthalo red, and craft yellow. And we're going to get started using our raw sienna. I like to use raw sienna a lot of times for a nice soft glow in the sky. It doesn't argue with the blue as harshly as a yellow would, but it gives us the same kind of a warm glow. Now, raw sienna is actually a brown shade, but it's very warm. So I like to start kind of in and around, very loosely, where my sun or my light source is going to be. And I just use a little tiny dab of color. Now keep in mind, these are acrylic paints. They will dry fast. And so we want to make sure that we keep moving. We don't stall. Once I've kind of sketched in this rough circular shape, I'm going to take some white. I'm not going to rinse my brush. I'm just going to grab some white off of the palette, and I'm just going to kind of brush it into the middle here. Now, I'm not a big fan of just painting a circle and then filling it in. I like to have a lot of organic, just kind of brush strokes that happen. So I kind of just blot the color in and push it away from the center here. Now, we don't need this to be pure white right now. We're just going for a nice little warm glow. I'm going to go around this circle a little bit more and just kind of start working my way out. Now, one of the tricks you want to do when we're transitioning is when we put fresh paint onto the canvas, I like to work in little bits, just a little dose, so I can kind of see how these colors are going to interact. So you can see I'm not doing big brush strokes going like this. It's kind of little dabs, and I'm going to work my way out. Just using a little bit more of the sienna as I go. We can always come back later and add more white to the middle where the actual sun is, or maybe it's the moon coming up. I don't know. It's up to you. It's your own painting. You can tell people whatever you want to tell it. Tell them. Tell them. Tell it. Yeah, you figure it out. You know what I'm saying. Now, one of the things that we'll notice is that as we start working away, we're wanting to use more and more of the raw sienna. But then what happens is we get a little bit too much color going on. So I'm really going to kind of use a mix of the raw sienna and white. And I don't necessarily mix it on my palette. I just kind of wait until it starts getting a little bit too much raw sienna looking. And I'll just put a little bit of white on my brush and just kind of mix it in on the canvas. And we're just going to keep basically, I'm going to bring this down to about the halfway point of the canvas. We'll come back and bring some more down further a little bit later, but we also want to push this out to the sides mostly. Sides and the top corner. And while I'm kind of working radially, my brush isn't just going like this. A lot of times when we paint, we want to paint a circle. This is what we instinctively want to do, is we want to paint a circle, and we want to just kind of keep painting around in circles. And you kind of get that tunnel vision kind of look, like there's a freight train coming down in the tunnel and you're someplace where you don't want to be. So let's try to avoid that nonsense. Yeah, it's not nonsense. That was a mean way of saying it. Let's try to avoid that. And I'm just going to keep adding little bits of white. It does a couple different things. Number one, it keeps that raw sienna from being too bold and intense. The other thing it does for us is it helps push that raw sienna all the way out to the sides. Now, as we keep working away, again, I don't want to be using just this pure raw sienna, but I also don't want to get too light. Now, the instinct for us all is to keep coming back to the central spot and keep adding more and more and more white. And what'll happen is if we keep doing that, we'll actually get to the point where we start to lift paint, and we don't want that to happen either. So, you can see by my brush strokes, this is not a precision activity. So we're getting this going. I'm just going to keep it going all the way across the canvas, maybe about halfway down. And I always, again, I may have said it earlier, I'm not sure, but I'm always trying to, when I bring fresh paint to the canvas, I'm adding it to the wet paint that's in the area where I'm working. There we go, that's good. Good, a little bit more white. Just to soften it up. Down here. Now, a lot of this transition stuff around here, we're going to end up putting trees over, so don't worry about it too much. We'll add some more white here once this dries a bit. But really, I don't know if you can notice, but I'm holding the brush really far back, like in this area, and that enables me to let the brush do the work. Hold it very loose, relaxed. Don't put a death grip on it, you'll cramp up. And you just want to let it kind of do its thing. Let me take a little sip of tea. Yes. All right, so the next thing I want to do is we want to let this dry, because we're going to add some dark colors in the top corners. We're going to add some, kind of looks like storm clouds a little bit. And we want to make sure that this is nice and dry, because a little bit of mixing is okay. But we don't want it can sometimes get muddy, and we don't want that to happen. So what I want to do next is we're going to work down now, creating basically our water, where the water is going to trace to. And so I'm going to start out using my raw sienna, and we're going to do the same basic technique we did before, but this time, instead of kind of going circular, we're going to work side to side. So I'm going to start kind of choppily, working down either side of where my sun may or may not be casting some light. I'm going to add a little bit of white in there. So I come back right underneath, right in line, brush the white in. I've got the brush turned on its edge. And I'm trying to be really careful to make sure that I'm letting this be nice and choppy. I like to tell people in the studio that if you get too smooth and even, we end up painting a racing stripe. And while I love racing stripes on nice classic muscle cars, I don't love them on my traditional landscape paintings. We're just going to keep working our way down. We can bring this all the way down to the bottom of the canvas. And when I get to my horizon, I actually like to kind of smudge that out a bit. Kind of make it a little bit less distinct. A little bit more of my raw sienna. And I'm just letting these colors mix on the canvas. You want to put enough paint on that you can no longer see the white of the canvas. But at this stage, we don't want to necessarily put it on so heavy that it's chunky. Down in here is not as important. We're going to have some other colors going down in here, but I like to go ahead and bring it down. Chunky is good with thick, chunky paint. This is kind of more of a fluid, lighter, thin body acrylic, so it doesn't really adapt itself to being chunky as well as others do. And if it makes you feel good to hum and sing while you're painting along, go for it. If you're painting at home alone like I am, which seems like everybody should be right now, there's nobody's going to judge you for what you hum or sing. So sometimes I just have to switch over to my left hand. Not very good with it, but when I'm filming, I don't really have the ability to move around quite as much as I would if I were just sitting in a chair in front of an easel. All right, bring a little bit more of this white through the middle here. And it's okay if this bottom part is more in the sienna range. It just creates a nice little foundation for us to paint on as we go. There we go. Nice and chunky. That works. Now this is all going to dry, and as we start bringing everything in, this is our foundation. We've got our primer. We've got the whole canvas covered in less than 15 minutes, and we're ready to keep moving on with our sky. Now the sky part, we probably want to switch down to our number 8 brush width because we want to make sure that we're not bringing too much. I've got a number 8 round today. We want to make sure we're not bringing too much paint to the party yet. So I want to take a little bit of my phthalo blue, and I'm going to mix a little bit of color. I'm going to put it right over here. Let me actually I'll bring my palette up here because I don't know, I might edit this later. I'm going to take a little bit of my phthalo blue, not much. And when I mix colors, I don't like to mix a big batch at a time. I'm adding a little bit of my raw sienna there. And you can see we get a little bit of a greenish color. So I want to take that out and add a little tiny bit. Oh, that phthalo red's strong. It's got something to say. And that's okay. We're just going to tighten this up a bit. A little bit more phthalo blue. There we go. And I think I'm going to add a little bit of white here just to tone it down. So we're making just kind of a grayish, slightly on the blue side of lavender. Because I don't want this color, we don't want to use very much of this at first. And I'm going to show you. I always like to say it's like we're making soup when we're testing the salt in the soup. We don't want to throw a whole big handful of salt in there. We're going to take just a little pinch at first, and then we're going to taste it and see how that soup tastes and decide if we need more salt. So what I mean by that is I'm going to take just a little bit of paint. I'm going to kind of dab a little bit up in here. Now I like to use, sometimes I think we'll do this the 2-brush technique. I like to use the smaller brush, like my number 8, to apply just a little bit of that color on there. And then using my bigger brush, which I've cleaned and dried, I like to kind of fluff it out. The reason I like to do that is it allows me to push the paint around without adding more paint. Now, I can see that I kind of lifted a little bit of paint up here, so I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm just blotting some of that in there. Now, this is something that I very much can't emphasize enough. Try a little bit at a time. Take your time. If you need to pause the video, pause it. Because what we don't want to have happen is it's really easy to get carried away with this. And I'm just using it to kind of just lightly fluff. Now I can see I've lifted some paint up here in this corner, and that happens sometimes. And I think I'm just going to add a little bit of paint on there right now. And you can see if you have this happen, and this happens every so often with these canvases, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but sometimes there will be little spots, and maybe it was somebody who worked at the plant making the canvas was wearing gloves and got some kind of a powder or like talcum powder from the gloves or something in that spot, and the paint sometimes just doesn't quite want to stick there at first. Now the key there is instinctively we want to sit there and go, I'm going to just keep painting that area until paint sticks there, and it's just going to have to like it. Well, that's not the way it's going to work. It doesn't like that when we do that. So we're going to I just put a little bit of paint, just enough so that I can see that there's a little bit of paint there. I'm going to let that sit so that it has a chance to become the new primer for us to paint on. And that'll just take a few minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing the same thing on this other side. Just a little bit of paint. And I'm just going to kind of scratch it in here and go back to my big brush and push it around. Now you get too crazy, you can always add a little bit of the sienna back in there and warm it up if you feel like it's too dark. But we don't want this to become like a real stormy sky, so just a little bit. Yeah, maybe just a little bit. You can maybe even add just a little bit of water to your paint. Yeah, that works good. Again, we don't want this to take over, so I'm just going to very lightly fluff this out. Now you don't have to use this big of a brush, but I like to use this big brush, and I'm barely touching the canvas. Barely, just giving a little whisper of a little smudge here. Now, I know what happens is a lot of times we start doing this, we kind of have a tendency of wanting to panic about this whole thing. So, don't panic. We're all good. If you're real careful, you can just use that number 8 like I'm doing right now. I'm just using just a little bit of it on my brush. A little bit of texture is good. A lot of times one of my favorite questions to get at the studio when we're teaching in person or at one of the locations where we teach remotely is, how do I get rid of the brush strokes? Well, I tell people you don't want to get rid of the brush strokes. It's a painting. That's what makes it a painting, is the organic nature of a person's hands using something that's not designed to make things perfect and putting it on there so that it looks like it's man-made, not like a computer printed it or whatnot. So, let there be brush strokes. All right, next step. We're just going to let that sit. I still got that little pocket there I want to fix before we get going too far. But while we're still using these same basic colors, I'm going to keep using this little bit of a dulled down gray, purpley gray. And I want to get some of this going in my water. Now, whenever I'm painting in my water, I want to make sure that my brush is moving side to side. Not very much paint. I'm just using the big brush right now. And what I'll do is I'll come up a couple inches and then I'll just start kind of brushing side to side and working my way up so that paint just kind of fades out into the other water elements. Just like so. There we go. I think we did it. I don't know why I'm talking like this today. I think I've been watching people on YouTube that have southern accents, so I'm like, yeah. All right. That's good. I'm going to test this little area up here. I think I'm going to let that sit just a little bit longer. Now, oh, this is great tea. I'm enjoying this. Okay, so next thing we want to do is we want to create our next layer a little bit closer to us. And what's always difficult when we paint a landscape is we look at this painting and we're seeing it as a flat surface, but we have to think about it like we're looking down a tunnel. And so we have to build our elements so that it enforces the idea that we're looking down a tunnel. So what we want to do is one of the things that we do to create that perspective, there are, in my opinion, 3 basic simple elements that need to change to create perspective for us. Number 1 is size. So if we're doing a tree that's a long ways away, we want it to be small versus one that's close, we want it to be taller. The second thing is detail. So the further things get away, the more detail we're going to lose when we look at them. So a tree that's a mile down the road, we're not going to see a lot of detail. We're just going to see the basic shape of it. The third thing is color saturation. As things move away, our eyes are unable to take that color and saturate it enough to really get the full detail of the color that we're seeing. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep working with our kind of color that we just used. I'm not going to use it exact. I'm going to add a little bit more phthalo blue to it and a little bit more of my phthalo red and a little bit more white. Now I'm kind of taking this a little bit more in, just a little bit more in the grape bubblegum kind of territory. The fun thing about painting, especially painters from Frederick Church's era and Albert Bierstadt and a lot of the other painters from the kind of the mid-18 to late 1800s, is the reality is this was their form of Instagram. They would go travel the world and paint pictures, but they would take those colors and put a filter on them, make it a little bit surreal so that when they came home, they could show people these amazing places they've been. And of course, they're always kicked up. I mean, it's just like us. We put on those face filters so that it gets rid of the blemishes and adds fun colors and things like that. It's the same thing, trying to impress people. It's all good. That's what it's all about. There's nothing wrong with that. So we're using a little bit more of an intense lavender than we probably would normally see. Let's see. Yeah, grape bubblegum. That works. Now what we can do, there's 2 ways to do this. I'm going to show you the first way. Is we just kind of want to take the brush and kind of scribble up. Now, I'm not worrying about the bottom edges. And you can use a flat brush too. But really, it's just scribbling. Now, I know it's driving you nuts because you want to put branches on these trees, but these trees are too far away to see those branches, so leave them be. I'm just going to scribble my way across. Not really thinking too much about what I'm doing. I am kind of creeping up a little higher, maybe down a little lower in some spots. I'm not worrying about the bottom edge yet. I like to go a little higher on the outside edges. It kind of just re-enhances that concept of looking down a tunnel. It helps pull our eye towards the middle. I'll just kind of scribble some of this color. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to my biggest brush real quick. Take a little bit of this color and just kind of pull that color down. Pull it down to your horizon line. You can get some fresh paint on your palette, on your brush if you need to. Mix up a little bit more of this color here. Little phthalo blue, little phthalo red, little tiny bit of white. So everything we're doing right now, we're changing the texture, because texture is a contrast we use in painting also. We're changing the texture by moving the brush in a different direction than what's behind it and what's in front of it. So I'm really digging how this is turning out. Now every time we paint, our colors are going to be a little bit different. Some days we see it different, sometimes the light's different. I've even had times where the pigment's just a little different. Maybe you switch to a different brand of paint. I don't want to get too much more detail down. I feel sometimes like even on this part, I'm tempted to want to put branches on these, but I know better. I know better. All right. Just keep working it over. Mix a little bit more paint as you go. It's the best way to make your paint last as long as you can. A lot of times people run out of paint because they mix too much at once, and then they're stuck with this purple color and they aren't going to need it, but then they need their phthalo blue. And they used it all making the purple, so just mix it as you need it. Now I'm going to come back and get this middle area. Don't worry, I didn't forget about it. Mix it just a smidge more. Sometimes when I get going on a rhythm, it's almost every time I go to the palette, I just mix a little bit more. I just kind of mix it as I need it. You guys are probably like, wow, he's just scribbling. Yeah, I kind of am. All right. Now, I left this middle open just a little bit, and there's a reason for that. I'm going to now take that same purple, I'm going to add just a little bit of raw sienna to it, and a little bit more white. And I'm just going to kind of start right on top of one of my existing purple ones. I'm going to get really small. You can even use your smallest brush for this if you want to. But I like to take this and overlap this into my existing trees just a bit. And see what we're doing is we're adding just a little bit of lighter so it looks like they're just a little bit further away yet. There we go. And you can take some of this color and kind of brush it along the bottom edge here. In fact, we're going to do that. I'm going to take this color that we just mixed up. I'm going to add a little bit more white. I want to bring this down into a real nice pale lavender color. And I'm just going to brush it along this bottom edge real quick. I'm going to wipe the excess paint off. And again, if you need to pause at any time, just do it. I'm just going to kind of lift this color in. And what this does is it gives us this idea that there's maybe a little bit of fog hanging out in between us and this background. And it's going to help us when we start to add our layers that go in front. Let those stand out just a little bit more. This looks like a good place to go have a cup of coffee, doesn't it? Maybe a glass of wine if it's on private property. I don't want to encourage people to go drinking in public and get in trouble. All right, there we go. Now I've got this one little tree right here. It's a little blocky. I could let it be, or I could just fix it real quick. I'm gonna give it a quick little nudgy nudge. Maybe throw in a little extra there. I think that's looking pretty good. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to start laying out our foreground. And you know, I think what I'm going to do is this little patch right here. I could fix that, and now would be a good time to fix it. Or what I could do, and I think this is what I'm going to do, is when we come in at the very end and put in our bigger trees, I think I'm just going to put a big tree right over the top of that, save myself the hassle of having to fix it now. And I like to call these big foreground trees landscape painter's band-aid. So we're just going to put a band-aid over that little wound there, and we'll call it good. All right, so I'm going to mix up together now just phthalo blue and phthalo red. And what's the right ratio? I don't know. I don't know that I can really say there's a right ratio. What I can tell you is you want to use your own eyes and say, is it too blue? Is it too red? If it's too blue, you add a little bit more red. If it's too red, you add a little bit more blue. And that's the right ratio. Now, the downside to that is that means you got to trust yourself. But I trust you, so you should be able to trust yourself too. All right, so here we go. Now, the original canvas that we have pictured on our website is a 16 by 20 canvas, and we're painting this on an 11 by 14. So sometimes when we make that transition, we have to change things up just a little bit because it gets a little bit squished feeling if we try to add everything. So I'm going to do a little bit less, not a lot, just a little bit less of little fingers of land coming out so it doesn't feel too squished. So we do want to make sure that's still a primary part of the painting. So here we go. What we need to consider is this river is narrow at the top and it's going to get wider as it comes down. So we want to make sure that we're kind of nudging in towards the middle. Now I'm going to come right down from the middle. I'm using that dark color we just made, and I'm coming down just a little bit below my horizon line. And I'm going to take this brush. You can use your biggest brush for this, but I'm liking this brush. This needs to go pretty close to horizontal. It can taper down a little bit. Sounds like I got a little canine visitor walked in. I can't tell which one it is. Now, the reason we want to do this horizontal is when we look out across a river or a lake or an ocean, what we see is the horizontal plane where the water interacts with the shoreline. Our eye kind of thinks of it when we look down, if we see a lot of angles, it feels like we're looking down on the water, or we're looking at water that's flowing steeply like a waterfall. So we want to keep this fairly flattish. It can be a little bit not. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up from here. Now I know that our finished painting looks far more green than what we're painting. We'll get there. We'll get there. Just be patient with me. We'll get there. And I'm just gonna kind of let this, I might actually switch to my biggest brush real quick. Just gonna kind of let this fluff and disappear out into our background as it gets further away from the point. Hi Hachi, it's Hachi. If you guys ever want to see Hachi, Jenny's put him in some of the introductions for the kids' classes. Sitting in her lap. He's our 5-year-old Shiba Inu. We have an older Shiba too, but Hachi's the one that always comes in and digs around in everything while we're trying to paint. Okay, so that's a good foundation. Now, as we keep moving closer to us, what we're going to start doing is we're going to start adding more and more of our phthalo blue. And the reason is as we're going to get closer, we're going to start loosening this softness of the purple. We're still going to use a little bit of the phthalo red, but I'm going to be totally okay if it's really close to blue for this next one. As we move closer, we want to just continue to get darker and darker and darker with this, and that's how we know we're getting closer to us. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find this point. I'm going to move down about 1/2 inch, and to the right about 1/4, 3/8 of an inch or so. Right, like so. Now this is my little bit darker color. A little bit more. Again, this is the only one on this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to kind of scribble this. My brush is moving side to side, but my hand is controlling where the, or my arm is controlling where the brush is. So that's how I create a downward coming shoreline, is by scribbling side to side but moving. My brush is always going side to side, but then my arm brings the brush down. Now this is going to be a little bit more moundy. You can see as we start getting a little darker, a little darker, a little darker, this is what we end up with. Now the brush strokes. What are the brush strokes we're using? Just kind of chaos. The reason I like to do it that way is we're painting all kinds of bushes and shrubs and trees and all kinds of little things like that. And if we do all kinds of movement while we do this, what happens is we get little darker spots, little lighter spots, all of these little things that we like to have to create highlights and shadows, and we just kind of pre-build them in. Now, just like I did before, I'm just going to kind of smudge this out. And you can switch to a bigger brush if you want to. Just be careful that you're not just plotting the paint on as a thick, well, you can be thick with it, but as a solid, just like you used Photoshop fill tool or something like that. I got a little bit of paint lifted right there, but you know what? It looks like a highlight to me. Sometimes you can do that. You can come back through. I'll show you real quick. Rinse my brush. You can come back with a damp brush and lift paint that's still wet. I'm gonna add just a little bit of hints of some like little trees. But you have to be careful when you do it. It's something you want to practice. But you can see I did that right here. Just lifted some of the paint on purpose. And that's kind of a cool, it's kind of a watercolor thing you can do. That's the nice thing about the acrylics. They kind of work like watercolors in a lot of ways. Now I feel like when we come back in through here, this is feeling a little bit too wide. So we've got some other color we're going to be mixing in. We start adding our green tones, and we're going to let that green color kind of float in over this so that we get a little bit more of a hint of that this is narrowing as we get further away from us. But with that said, let's go on to our next step. Again, I'm going to mix up my phthalo blue and phthalo red. I'm going to add just a tiny little dot of black to it this time. Just want to, doesn't take very much. The black is very potent, so we want to make sure that we're not using a lot. Again, I'm going to find my end of this one. I'm going to move down. Oops, I got a little, well, it might end up being a rock. Who knows? Move down about a little bit more than ½ inch, and I'm going to start with a little dot, and again, I'm going to move back. Now that looks just black, but it's got it's not quite pure black. We don't want pure black on here yet. Again, mostly horizontal. This one we're going to be a little bit more horizontal with, rather than doing the wiggle to create the shoreline. This one I want to have. Let's. Have a little bit more texture on this one. Now, I think a lot of us, when we're working on something like this, our instinct, I talk about instinct a lot, because instinct is something that happens naturally based on our skill level. And when we first start, we don't have the experience yet. And we will get there. We just got to keep practicing. But our instinct is to draw a line like we would have done when we were younger, instead of using the brush to kind of bounce around and create shape and texture. And again, I'm just taking this color to the side, just kind of letting it muddle out into the background. Now we're going to come in later and put highlights and shadows in the water. So I'm going to switch to my bigger brush now. And I just kind of take my brush very lightly and just kind of lift, just soften up that edge. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to keep working down, and now the next two steps I think I'm just going to use pure black. I think that'll work a little better. I'm just adding more black to my puddle I've been working on. You can maybe see it. We'll see. Maybe I'll leave that in the edit. And if everything looks a little crooked now, it's because my dog came in and bumped the camera, and I don't feel like trying to adjust it. So being a little bit lazy, but I think it's a little bit easier just to leave it as it is. So next one we're going to do, we're going to start here. We're going to move about halfway between this point and the bottom of our canvas, about here. And we're going to move back a good inch, inch and a half. Now, again, we can kind of do this little scribble technique to create a little bit of a shore. Now this one I want to feel like a really good mound here. This one I am going to be using just mostly black, and the reason is I want this to be just a little darker than what we just painted on. We'll establish that more when we create highlights and stuff. Again, I just kind of use that smaller brush to lay it out. Come back in with my bigger brush. Just kind of plot this in here. fluff and lift. There we go. So this painting is really interesting because when you see the finished painting, you see more of a more greenish tones to it, and what we end up with is we will get there, but right now we've got a lot warmer purples and golds. And then what we're going to come do is, once we get done laying out the main parts of this, is we'll come in and we'll glaze in our greens on top, and then we'll use yellow to make them really pop. So if you're wondering, why does this look so purple and gold right now? Well, that's just the way it goes. All right, so this last little bit, I'm going to just use pure black. I'm going to use my bigger brush. I'm going to, again, come down about halfway between here. Actually, let's just come down a couple inches, or an inch, from the bottom of where this goes off the canvas. And there. And then I'm going to come over just a little bit past the middle of the canvas right there. All right. Again, it's kind of, I'm seeing some spots where it's not quite covering super dense. We can still see some of the background, and that's okay. I never have any problem with that. It actually helps, again, add interest and texture and contour and all that fun stuff. Now, I do want to put a little rock out off the point of this. And all I do to create my little rock is create a little flat spot. And then just mound up from it. I might do that. I've got a couple little, my brush tip just kind of kissed the water there. So maybe what I'll do is just kind of add a couple more there. There we go. Accidental brush marks hidden. Now this is a good time. We want all this to kind of dry a little bit. So this is a good time maybe to take a break, and if you want to hit pause right now and get up and walk around, stretch your brain a little bit, clear it, get a glass of water, get a cup of tea, pour another glass of wine. If you're really stressed about it, maybe pour yourself a shot. I don't know, whatever you feel like. A glass of milk, it doesn't matter. Whatever makes you happy right now, that's what you got to do. Go for it. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and continue. So if you're pausing, pause now. Wait a couple minutes. And then if you're rejoining us, welcome back. If you didn't take a break, let's keep rolling. So what I want to start doing is I'm going to take a little bit of white on my fingertip, and I'm going to create our actual sphere in the sky just by taking a little bit of white and just swirling it on in a circle-ish. I say circle-ish. So it doesn't need to be perfect. When the sun's low in the horizon, it tends to get a little bit deformed anyway, so that's fine. We can just leave it like that. All right, so what we're going to do now is, the last thing we're going to do on this painting is come back and do our highlights in the water from our sun. But for now, what we want to do is we're going to start, again, we're going to start back at our background and working our way forward. My painting, I didn't take a break, but there's some spots, they're still a little bit damp, but this background part where we started is nice and dry. So I'm going to rinse my brush. Ching-a-ling-a-ling. There we go. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to start filling this back area in with some of our greenish tones. Now, I know when you look at the finished painting, it's like, oh, but Paul, we've got water that flows through there, so we want to leave that. Well, that's okay, we do, but we're actually going to bring that back in when we put our highlights in. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to now take a little bit of my phthalo blue, just a little tiny bit, a little bit of my raw sienna, about equal parts, maybe a little bit more of the raw sienna than the blue. I might add a little tiny bit of my craft yellow. Yeah, my little bit of craft yellow helps. And we'll see what's going to happen here. I'm just going to start brushing this in. So I'm just made myself a nice little, I don't know, it's almost like split pea soupish, maybe a little bit on the brighter green. Just going to kind of start brushing that in over my water. But then the other thing I want to do is I want to take a little bit of this and glaze it up into my tree line a bit. What I try to avoid doing when I'm doing this is creating a really hard line. So I'll wipe my brush off and just kind of give it a quick little fluff. Just a little fluff up like that. So that's a good spot to be. I might give it a little. Any of this can be kind of reestablished when we do our white highlights. So if you feel like, wow, I did too much. You didn't. You did fine. All right, so I'm going to keep using the same color. And I'm just going to start kind of brushing over the top edges. I'm going to add just a little bit more of my, mix up a little bit more. I'm going to add a little tiny bit more of my craft yellow. So we are going over a little bit darker color, and I want to pop this a little bit more. There we go. Now, I know what happens a lot of times is we tend to just kind of draw a line. And what I like to do is kind of start across the top edge and work down from it until I run out of paint. So I kind of fade that out into the shadows. See, we've already built our shadows. We started with the shadows. Now we're just bringing the highlights in. And again, I'm just using a kind of a choppy brush stroke. I actually don't even like calling it a stroke per se, because then that gives the idea that we're supposed to be doing this, and we don't really want to be doing that. Again, I'm mixing as I go, a little bit at a time. This area is going to be much brighter. Let's see, I leave a little bit of that dark color showing. You can always bring the shadow back in. So if you get too much of this green going, it starts feeling a little unnatural. Now I'll tell you that if you use too much of the craft yellow and phthalo and not enough of that raw sienna, you will get battery acid, or not battery acid, antifreeze kind of green. And so we want to use enough of that raw sienna that we're still feeling like this is natural colors that we would see out in nature. Now this area over here, there's going to be a big tree covering a lot of that, so we don't have to be too concerned. Sorry, I'm drinking my tea. We don't have to be too concerned about this being perfect over here, because we're going to have these, probably just, well, we'll do 2 trees on the right-hand side. We'll do 1 on the left. And we actually have a big deciduous tree on this left-hand side that we're going to put in too. And it's kind of what we call an eye stopper, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, we're going to go back, do the left-hand side now. Again, same color. I got a little bit too light right now. Yeah, just a little bit more. There we go. And again, I'm just kind of letting these colors just kind of dissipate out as we work away from the center. Now, dissipate doesn't mean it just stops suddenly. It means we just kind of let it run out naturally. And you keep going. Again, a lot of times people ask, well, why didn't we just paint it green to begin with? Well, usually when you just paint green onto the blank canvas, you really don't get much personality to it. It kind of just almost looks like a grass stain. I'm using a little bit more of the raw sienna right there. And so what happens is the greens that we have, or these colors that we have to make green, have a tendency of really not showing well over white, but they show fantastically over black or another darker tone. So we start with the darker tone and we start building up the lighter tones. All right, we're gonna keep going here. Now this isn't a coloring book. It's not a paint by numbers. This is the real deal. So we wanna make sure that we're treating it that way by not just block filling. Block filling would be taking a solid color and just painting it in an area. And that's fine for a lot of things. It's fine for a lot of styles of art, but this particular painting, not so much. Now I'm just using the brush to kind of just smudge out the extra paint. This is a rock. I'm not going to put any green on it. I'm not going to worry about, well, yeah, let's go ahead and put some on down here. Now we're starting to get those greens showing up now. Now again, this is not, well, I guess maybe I haven't said it yet, so maybe it's not again. But this is not our finished green. This is our base green. Seems like, wait, how many steps are we going to do? Well, I like to build these paintings with layers. So we got our foundation, which is our dark colors in the background. And we got our base, our foundation is our dark shadowy colors. Now we've got our midtones, which is actually our base colors that we're using in this painting. And then we're gonna now start to make these really start to pop with color by using a little bit more of our raw sienna, and then we'll come back with a little bit of our craft yellow to really put some more vibrant highlights in our landscape. Now, what I find to be very interesting is that when we put a green foundation down using a combination of some form of yellow or gold, in this case sienna, a little bit of craft yellow, and then a blue, and again in this case our phthalo blue, what is amazing to me is when we come back then with a brighter yellow or the golden sienna, is it when we put it on there, it just reinforces the idea that this is green. So that's going to be a fun thing to show you guys. Now, before we get going too far, I want to go ahead and put this deciduous tree over here on the left. And it's an eye stopper. What's an eye stopper? So an eye stopper is something that you put along the edge of the canvas that keeps your eye from going off the edge of the canvas. So a lot of times we see this slope and our eye will naturally kind of follow, well, our eye kind of naturally follows them down, but it could follow this line and just kind of lose interest, kind of just keep going off the edge of the canvas. And we don't want that to happen. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of black paint. What we do is to create an eye stopper is we create an object that is on the left-hand side or along the edge of the canvas that frames the center of the canvas in without putting a frame on it. So I'm going to kind of just take this number 8. I'm going to go up, maybe just a little taller than my trees. Just a little bit of black here. and just kind of create like it's old Mr. Ross's afro. And just kind of fade it in at the bottom here. We'll let that sit. We'll add some color to it. It's not all just conifers. It's not all fir trees. There's deciduous trees that hang out in Oregon too. All right, so that's our one eye stopper. Now, I'm not going to worry about putting our big trees in. We're going to do those at the very end, or not the very, yeah, pretty close to the end, but we want to do our other elements that we're going to do first. And the reason we do it that way is if we were to try to put these trees in now, our tendency is to try to paint around them while we do other things. And we don't really want to do that. So then we can tell we painted around. So I'm going to take, again, we're sticking with this medium-sized brush. I'm going to take just a little bit of just raw sienna now. And these areas should be kind of dry. I'm not going to worry about this back spot. This back area, I feel like if we don't want to do too much highlight because then it brings it out too much and makes it compete with our foregrounds. So I'm going to take just a little bit, very small amount of the raw sienna now. Just kind of layer it in. Now again, I'm using just a small amount of paint, really loosely. And I don't want to get too much going on back up into the distance because our highlight, I like to think of it as like a big flashlight shining down through here. It's going to leave highlights coming in through this area, but it's not going to necessarily get too much over here. I mean, it might, but visually in real life it might, but when we're painting it, we want to kind of try to bring our focus to the middle of the canvas. A little bit less in this spot. A little bit less, but let's put a little big blotch right there. If you do that, all you gotta do is wipe your brush off, pick the paint up, put it down somewhere else. Now, I don't usually use these round brushes. We're usually using the studios just flat brushes, but man, I'm loving this. And just kind of keep moving. And you get a little bit in this one. Just a little bit of paint. You can see when every time I'm taking my brush away from the canvas, I'm actually usually just wiping extra paint off. But you can see how this starts to just kind of enhance this idea of this being greenery. At least it does to me. Now we're not bringing this highlight down as far as we did with our base tone. And we're keeping in mind that we're fading out into the shadows as we work our way down. Right now this is looking, I like the way this is looking when I look up at the monitor. And I think this helps by doing these little highlights. What this does is it helps, again, just reinforce this idea of depth and separation. It allows the ones that are closer to us, which again, they're the ones that are lower down on the canvas, but it allows them to lay in front of the background elements. And if I get a little too much of this color, I can just wipe it off, or I can come back and add shadow back in. Now, again, this is a technique. I keep saying again. I don't know if I should be saying again over and over again, because I don't think I have talked about this. But if you've been to one of my classes, you would know I've talked about this. When we're doing this, highlights, we don't want to brush the paint out. We just kind of want to set it there to kind of add some tufts. You can brush it out in some spots, like when you're further away, you can kind of brush it out a little bit more. I'm actually going to warm this up a bit here. There we go. But when we get a little bit closer, we actually kind of want to leave some little tufts of paint. Do a little bit down in here. Down in here we can really do some nice big splotches. So where we can start to see the colors really starting to separate out. All right, so this is a good place to be right now. What we're going to do next is we are going to come in and we're going to add some shadows of our water, of the elements in our water, because right now our water is way too bright because none of our background elements are reflected in, and they're not casting shadows. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a little bit of my water from my paint cup, and I'm going to mix into it. Now, I want to mix paint into it so that it becomes like the thick, like the texture of like heavy cream. And what I'm mixing is I'm mixing a little bit of phthalo blue, a little bit of phthalo red, and a little bit of raw sienna. It kind of just creates kind of a dull brownish kind of purple. And this is a good thing. Like what I like to do is when I'm testing my paint, you should be able to kind of, should have enough, oops, let me move those up here. You should have enough thickness that you can, it still stays where it's at. If you have a little bit too much water, it'll start to pool back up. But it's got to be really thin. Like I said, heavy cream. Now what I do is I put the brush, a little bit of brush paint on the brush, and I wipe it off on a clean spot on my palette because it's really easy to overdo this. And I'm just going to start very lightly, remembering that anytime I paint in water, you can add a little bit of shadow along back here. Anytime I paint in water, I want my brush moving side to side. And I'm mimicking what's up above. Always start with less. You can always add more, especially when we're doing something like this. We really want this paint to be nice and just a stain. Now, again, you might want to, well, we'll add some shoreline interaction in here. When we get over to the left-hand side, we'll probably go pretty heavy. We don't have to do anything with this landmass because it's in the foreground. Now remember that mixture. It's just phthalo red, phthalo blue, a little bit of raw sienna, and enough water to make it like heavy cream, maybe even just a smidge thinner than heavy cream, but not a lot. Because we're going to use it again when we reflect our trees. Now, what we can also do if you want to, and this is kind of an optional, but you can mix up a watered down version of our green as well. But I want to add a little bit of this shadow color. So I'm just adding a little extra phthalo blue and a little extra raw sienna. Because I still want it to be toned down. And I'm going to make sure I don't have too much on my brush. And I'm just kind of getting the top edges here. Just bringing, I'm not doing the whole thing, I'm just bringing a little bit of the green into this. There we go. I think that's about right. Doesn't have to be super bold. There's water flowing. It's not like a perfect mirrored reflection. All right, so let's talk about trees. Now, a lot of times when we paint trees, what we want to do is a lot of times people want to paint the trunk. And that's fine. You can paint the trunk. But what happens a lot of times when we do that is we end up then doing our branches in a way that are far too symmetrical, far too even, because we're trying to attach them to the trunk. And I like to do it a little bit different. I like to take the trunk out of the equation, create the branches, and then if you've got a gap and you want to put a trunk in, you can. But I'm going to start with the same brush. Again, I'm going to cover this area right here. Start with the tip of my tree. And kind of do a little bit of a V shape at the top. And then as I work my way down, now this is something I've got a tutorial on our YouTube called The Art of Seeing, and it's talking about doing fir trees. And it really talks about what I call a 5 and 7 tree, which means if this is the center of a clock of a face, center of a face of a clock right here, the angle is like it's going to 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock. And the reason we want to keep that angle is if we go wider, all of a sudden we've got a tree that's this wide, and we don't want that tree to be too wide. Now I've almost started a little bit too wide, but I can bring it back. I'm going to come down a few inches. We want to make sure there's a little bit of extra width being gained. You can see I don't need a trunk. I can kind of just paint. Now what I like to do is when I get down a little ways, I like to switch over to my biggest brush. You can do the whole thing with your big brush if you want to. Now this is going to come all the way down to this land mass. So that's why it's black. It's in the foreground for us. I'm kind of keeping the branches going fairly horizontal-ish. If anything, you can put a little pop up at the end. at the tip. The thing to remember is there are branches coming towards us, there's branches going away from us, there's branches going in every which direction. I intentionally leave some gaps here and there. One of the keys to really executing this type of tree, I think, is leaving bigger gaps than you think you want to. What I mean is bigger gaps between my branches. Just gonna bring this all the way down. And another trick I like is when I'm doing these trees, I don't like to leave the trunk showing. And I like to remind people, if you've ever gone out and cut a Christmas tree, you get down on your hands and knees and cut it off at the ground. Now sometimes, yeah, we get some big fir trees and they're taller, and you get the base is way up, but we would just have all trunk and no tree branches if that's what we're painting right now. Now I feel like this one tree is plenty on this particular painting. Now you could add a second tree if you want. I'll show you how you can kind of cheat a little bit and add the hint of a second tree. I'm just going to start with a little line right there by the edge of the canvas. I've got a little drip of paint of water. All right, just start the top just like you did the other one. And as you work down, you eventually hit the area where the rest of your tree just kind of covers over it. So there, we've got right along the edge of the canvas, another little tree. So I want to do one more tree, and this tree is kind of coming up in between this little bit of land and this little bit of land. And I'll show you if you want to do it with a trunk, this is how you do it with a trunk. I'm going to make this tree a little bit shorter because I want it to be, it's further back than this one. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of put it right here. Paint my trunk in. Now the rest of this technique is the same. I just gave myself a guideline. So I start with the tip. A lot of times people start their branches right at the very top, but if you think about like a Christmas tree, you got the top where you can put your little star. Now this is where I was talking about where it's really easy to just kind of stick to the trunk and just put branches side to side. We don't want to do that. What I mean by that is it's really easy to kind of just go through and just put symmetrical branches equally on each side of the tree, and we don't want to do that because that doesn't really look very good. And this one's a little bit more in the middle of the canvas, and you'll find when you do this that one side of the canvas will be easier for your hand than the other side, and I'm finding feel like this side is working much better with my hand than the right hand side did, and that's okay because I feel like I'm getting kind of some exciting detail going on in this tree. I'm going to show you guys on this particular tree how we can really give it a dimensional look. That's because we've got two things going on that's going to happen with this particular tree. We're going to have reflection and shadow, and they're going to be completely different directions, and it's just going to really give us some cool dimension. And I'm just sticking with the same number 8. I kind of recommend typically that you use the biggest brush you can. I'm just going to let this nestle in between these two bits of land. Just stop right there. And the reason I like you to use the biggest brush you can is when we use a smaller brush, our tendency is we tighten up and we really start thinking about individual brush placement and things like that. And when we get too focused in on placing each little brush stroke, these trees take forever. They seem very contrived and placed. And we don't want that. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to switch to our smallest brush for a second. And if you've got a brand new one, you might need to give it a quick rinse. Now these are, if you're getting... if you've bought the brush kits and you've got these Simply Simmons brushes, these are fantastic brushes. These are what we use in the studio and was mostly what we use at home now too. And if you take good care of them, actually you take good care of any paintbrush, they're going to last a long time for you. So if you bought a set and you really enjoy what you're doing, you don't need to buy a new set of brushes every time you buy a kit. You can choose to leave the brushes out because you've already got a set. And for the most part, we just use just these brushes. We do have some others that are similar, that are different color handles and stuff like that that have gone out. But for the most part, the brushes we're sending out, actually I shouldn't say for the most part, all the brushes we're sending out are brushes. If you take good care of them, they'll take good care of you. So don't feel like you have to buy new brushes all the time. I would love you to buy new brushes all the time, but you don't have to. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of pure white now. And I'm going to start just adding a little bit of white, just some dabs. And I'm moving my brush side to side. And that's how we give this idea that this little creek is getting a little tiny down at the very back. Again, I'm just going to add some reflections, and I'm going to be pretty smudgy with it. Now, these little reflections of the light are not going to be in my shadows. And when I get down a little bit further, and I rinse off my medium-sized brush, I'm going to get it really dry, get as much of that pigment out of there as I can. Now this is just the reflections of the sun, so we kind of want to keep it within the width of the sun and in line with the sun. Just some little horizontal smudges here and there. You don't want to smudge the whole thing because there's shadows and stuff, and we might go back and add some shadows if we want to add more definition, but I kind of like this to be pretty bright in through the middle. Doesn't have to come all the way down, but we just brightened up that middle area. Now, let's go back to our smallest brush. Let's add some surface interaction. We don't want to do it necessarily back here at the very back. It's too far away to see it. I know Bob Ross does that all the time with his palette knife, and that's great. We're not using palette knives, so we don't have that hard edge. That's really fine, so we're using the small brush. Now, I'm going to use, this is my example for you, for surface interaction with the shoreline. And start off the point. And I'm just scribbling the brush side to side along where the water meets the shoreline, and it's right in between our shadow and our shoreline. Now this is something that I think sometimes gets overdone, and let me just point out the important step to this is when we come back across and we hit land, we stop. We don't keep following this land down. We pick this one back up where we can see the shoreline, You can even mix a little bit of water with your white if you want to keep it a little bit more toned down, but I think that this white's a little easier to see. Now you can create little extra little bits of land and stuff like that. I do think it's good to throw a couple little extra little ripples in so it's not too bold. It doesn't just stop. And do it around this rock. You can kind of create your shape of your rock a little bit more. Maybe the rock leaves a little ripple trail going through here. Same thing, and do the same thing on this side. Now this is something that I could consider optional. I think it's overdone, but it is nice. I mean, it's not something I would be offended by. I just think sometimes it's overdone. I might as well go ahead and do it on this one too. And do a few little scratchy little ripples into the other water here. And we're not done yet. We're almost there, guys. Okay, I think that's enough. Almost looking at the monitor, it almost looks a little bit too much, but I can see in my own painting that it's not, so that's okay. All right, so I do want to use a little bit of I'm going to keep using the small brush and a little bit of our craft yellow. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some little tiny bits of some highlights on some of this areas. And this is just really where little tiny bit of sunlight is just kind of kissing the edge of these trees. And this looks almost a little bit too bold, but that's okay. It's easy to fix if you do too much with this. It doesn't take much. But you're not just drawing lines, you're just adding little pops of color here and there where the sun's just kind of picking up a little bit. This is really a potent color and it's really easy to do too much, so be careful. Again, it's easy to come back and adjust it, but this can really give us a little bit of that, almost a surreal kind of pop. And the closer we get down to us, maybe a little bit more we're going to see of this. And down in this foreground, I want to do a little bit more. So I'm using a little bit bigger brush. Now you can leave that dark too. Now, I talked about shadows and highlights and things like that and reflections, and I'm going to go ahead and do, rather than doing a shadow for this tree, I'm actually going to do a highlight coming down. So what I do is I look at the angle, I use my brush, here's my center, my light source, it's going to cast a shadow or it's going to cast highlights, and I'm going to look at this angle and just use a little bit of my raw sienna to just hint at a little bit of some highlight popping through there. Maybe add some little pops of brighter highlight. If you get too much with this and you feel like, oh man, I just did too much, it's okay. Just wait a minute, come back over. Sometimes when you get down in this foreground area, the chunkier you get, the choppier you get, the more interesting it looks, the more it looks like you really put some thought and effort into detail. You can kind of give the idea that you kind of got some highlights that are really kind of tracing through here by just adding a little bit of angle. Sometimes I feel like maybe I did a little bit too much there, but that's okay. Okay, last little step we're gonna do is this tree right here is gonna cast a reflection into this water because it's darker. This one does too. I'm not gonna worry about that one too. Yeah, we can do both. Let's do both. But then it's also going to cast a shadow this way. So let's start with the shadow. I'm going to use that medium-sized brush. I'm going to mix up a dark purple using my phthalo blue and phthalo red. And let's see. Let's check my line here. So it's going to cast a shadow this way. And I'm just going to got a little shadow going that way from that tree. It's picking up on this other land, so it kind of jumps a little bit. And then we're going to use the same color, and we're going to come straight down. It's not going to cast a shadow, it's just reflecting. And I'm just kind of scribbling side to side. Now, if you want to kind of take some of this darker shadow color and kind of come back and throw any in along any of the undersides of your little land masses, you can. If you got carried away, like I feel like this side right here could use a little bit more. You can kind of create some rocky structures and stuff by doing that. All right, so that is it. I'm not going to put any other detail into our trees. I mean, you could put a little hint of a trunk using highlights. This one I feel like it's not really necessary. I think it adds too much detail. Oh, I can feel like maybe that's a little too bold real quick, so I'm just going to touch that up. Just using a little bit of raw sienna to make that gold not quite so oomphy. I mean, that bright yellow. There we go. There we go. So last thing to do, to sign it, use your smallest brush. I really like any color. Nah, not any color will work. I mean, white works good, yellow works good. I think I'm going to use our craft yellow today. I'm going to hide it right down here. There we go. Now, we are all done with Oregon Oasis, and if you have just stumbled across this painting while scanning through YouTube and you're wondering about what we do, check out our website, gobox.com. We ship out all of these products as kits. The kits include the paint, canvas, and if you order the brushes, they come with the brushes. Really what you're supporting is us teaching you these tutorials. If you have any questions or if you'd like to see us paint something that you think would be fantastic, drop us a comment line. If you want to see our next video, make sure you subscribe to our channel, ring the bell so you get the notification, and then you'll join in on, either Jenny or I. Jenny's the other main teacher, and sometimes maybe we'll have another teacher. I'm not sure yet. Thanks for joining me. I hope you had a great time. We'll see you next time.